Okay, are you guys able to see what looks like a bunch of scores?
Yep.
Cool. Going to meet you guys, put you down here. All right, so first just kind of going off on why and kind of explain a couple of things. I'm not sure what everyone's experience is as far as headless, what that means, what decoupling, all kinds of weird terms like Jamstack that I first looked at and was just like, what does all this mean? So first, just kind of what is headless WordPress? And basically, to make it very elementary definition, it just means basically using WordPress to provide the data, and then you can use that data with Gatsby. It uses GraphQL, or you can use the WordPress REST API built in. But basically, it just means that you are using WordPress to only display that data, and then whatever wants to display that data. For me, this is Gatsby. There's, a bazillion different ones out there now. Someone mentioned 11D, there's Felt, there's Next, there's, a different framework every month. And you can use those to display the WordPress data and however you would like. So that is what I mean by headless WordPress. Is basically just raw data, using it as a backend to only display data, and then I use Gatsby on the front end to display that data. And that pattern is called decoupling, because you can basically, I could shut down my Gatsby site and spin up a Next.js thing, and I could use that same data and display it how I want. So that is what headless WordPress, and that is what Gatsby means. Along that field, you will hear something called Jamstack. It is very similar to, it's just a form for a stack, which is basically, again, to very simplify it, there's a link in here if you'd like to read up more, but it just means a static generated site. And what that entails is creating a client-side website that basically serves only static pages, meaning that it makes no call to a database. To put it very simply, everything you see on the Gatsby site, for the most part, they are starting to pull in server-side rendering and stuff like that, but let's pretend like that doesn't exist for now. Basically, it's just a static-centered website, HTML files, JS files, CSS files, and that's pretty much it. There's no backend languages, there's no calls to the database, and stuff like that. So now kind of why I went this route. One, I was just hearing a lot of buzz about it. I was kind of getting bored at my current job, which was mostly WordPress development. We did some Laravel stuff too. And I found myself kind of, I wouldn't say overcomplicating things, but I know I was kind of explaining to Ryan before we jumped in, is I found myself building a lot of custom WordPress endpoints. And then I was building them within the theme. I was creating JavaScript files, basically using object-oriented patterns, and basically creating my own components in a sense of using those custom REST points, and then creating the JS files to basically build my own components to display within the WordPress theme. So I was kind of starting to use that pattern, and I heard a lot about this. And then, as many people I've seen in the Slack groups and stuff started diving into Gutenberg, block editor, they were really pushing React and kind of moving that sort of way. And I was like, all right, cool, this is something new to learn. So I really dove into that, started diving into building custom blocks and block editor stuff, which anyone who's done it natively knows that it's all React. And the React part was fine, but I was really getting frustrated with just how much stuff was changing and end of life cycle, and I'd be writing things and then they become deprecated and I had to go back and change things. And so I just decided to kind of take a step back, and I wanted to kind of sort that out, and let a lot of those bugs and frustrations I had hopefully mull over, and see if it would, see where it comes the end of this year, the beginning of next year. Because I do have hope that it, will be a great product. I just was getting very frustrated, and I found myself bogging down and spending a lot of time trying to figure out things that I didn't feel like I should really be trying to figure out. And if anyone's dove into the documentation, I couldn't really find answers. I basically was just sorting through source code. So that was another reason, is I kind of see WordPress going in two different ways. One was kind of that Gutenberg block editor, full site editor. The other one was kind of decoupling the two and, you know, using WordPress for the data, because the back end is very familiar. It does, you know, power a majority of websites on the web by now. That number, every time I look at it, goes up another percent or two. And, you know, it's not going anywhere. So you might as well embrace it. And that's kind of why I broke off into the headless. It seemed like there is a huge community growing. The other part is Gatsby and a lot of these static site generators. Anyone who's involved in the SEO world or just marketing in general knows that Google announced, I think it was in June, that they're actually taking their web vitals into consideration with ranking. And that's something Google's never really done before, is actually telling you what's going to affect organic search. Usually it's just some crazy magic, and you kind of know with backlinks and, you know, other stuff too. It's not really my field, but long story short, you don't really know how it works. And Google actually was like, hey guys, we are, you know, this is a thing. We're going to start ranking you on this thing. These are the things that we are measuring. And they didn't say exactly how it affects it, but they told you that basically you need to, you know, get into this. And these static site generators were really good with these web vitals. And I just found myself, as much as I was stripping out WordPress stuff, and especially with the block editor and kind of moving that way, I wasn't meeting the scores that I was really liking either. So that's kind of why I went this path and decoupling the two. So why I chose Gatsby specifically, one, it was probably, to be perfectly honest, just the most trendy and buzzword I heard. And usually what that kind of means is there's also a big community behind it, which I, you know, within 10 seconds, I found out is very true. They have someone from WP Engine, which is basically, you know, the big conglomerate of WordPress hosting. They have a guy named Jason Ball, who's a very smart engineer over there, who created a plugin called WP GraphQL, and I'll explain that, you know, as I dig into the technical side of things. But long story short, he was really pushing this, and they had a bunch of other really smart people kind of in the WordPress world and recruiting them and kind of getting them to build into it. And just kind of a side note, another big thing that made me realize a lot of stuff is moving towards headless, or this is going to be a big thing, is WP Engine actually is creating their own framework called WP Atlas, I think is the name of it. But basically they're taking Next.js, which is similar to Gatsby, and integrating that into their system. So if people want to decouple the two, they can. So that just kind of, you know, is a background of how big this is really getting and starting to take off. So again, Gatsby just had the community. There was different groups, a lot of people talking in different Slacks. They have a Discord channel that was pretty helpful. If you go to YouTube and start searching, which is, you know, basically how I learned Gatsby, is I spent some time basically going through YouTube videos. The docs are really good as well. I think Gatsby documentation is some of the best stuff I've ever read through, and I'll pull it up soon. So it's just community, trendy. It's also supported. And about the time when I really started diving into this, they released their Gatsby source plugin officially. It was no longer in beta. And basically that's just a connector to make it really easy to connect your WordPress site to Gatsby and not have to worry about actually connecting to your WordPress site to handle all that for you. So there's just a lot of plugins, community, and stuff like that that made it really nice. And I think Gatsby, personally, I have no information backing this up, just kind of a hunch. I feel like they're really pushing to be that front end of a decoupled WordPress site. So I really see them moving in that direction, and I only see that community and such getting stronger. So that's basically the why. So this is kind of basically my old website. I have a travel blog that's basically just a standard blog. There's nothing too fancy on it. And originally I built it on Sage, which is kind of a Laravel pattern inspired framework that uses like blade templating and stuff. It's pretty cutting edge in my opinion as far as theme development goes with WordPress. They have a lot of built-in tools that really helped with optimization stuff. such as like kind of code splitting and inlining CSS styles and stuff like that. I found that to be a lot of stuff that I was building custom. Sage kind of had already built that in, and it used like its own caching system to make stuff really fast. So I was a pretty big fan of it. So my previous build was Sage starter theme. I was using Tailwind CSS, which is just a CSS framework. Advanced custom fields. I had an Instagram plugin to pull in my Instagram feed. I was using auto optimize to kind of basically compile and minify JSS, even though I was already doing it. The biggest one here is before WordPress and browser had native support. It was also for lazy loading images. I had my own library built out, and I was just a pain, so I went the plugin route. I was using Rank Math for SEO stuff. I used to be a system admin at InMotion Hosting, so I have quite a few friends still over there. So I have a VPS server that one of my friends doesn't do anything with, and he basically lets me go wild with it. That's where it was hosted. And I was using Gravity Forms. This screenshot was before I updated the website. Now, I will say this is a bit skewed, and I could have spent more time here optimizing it. One of my biggest hits here were images. One of my favorite things about Gatsby, which I'll get into, is the way it handles images. But basically, anyone who is a stickler on site speed knows that media is one of the biggest ones on top of like JavaScript loading in, and images is most of the time the media that's bogging it down. Here my images were optimized, but I was still using like PNGs and stuff like that, and there are plugins that I could have automatically converted those to WebP. So this is kind of me skewing it a little bit. I don't think my performance really been a 42 if I actually spent a couple hours or so digging through my theme and optimizing it. So that's just kind of me admitting that this looks a little worse than it probably was. I have, at previous companies and stuff like that, based off the same tech stack, I've gotten scores, into the 80s and stuff like that. So yeah, this is a little bit skewed, and I will admit it. But yeah, so that was my previous build. That's where I came from. And this, on my current build, I'm using Gatsby.js, WP GraphQL. I switched back to Yoast because it has a supported GraphQL add-on. I using advanced custom fields with the GraphQL add-on. I switched to Netlify, which is kind of the main. Gatsby has its own hosting, and I'll kind of dive into that, but I chose Netlify not for any really strong reason, besides the sheer fact that it's probably pretty dominant when it comes to Jamstack hosting. Most static site generators all support Netlify, have custom plugins and stuff built in to adapt to Netlify, make it very easy to deploy to Netlify. So I could have used Gatsby Cloud here. There's a ton of them, Vercel, all kinds of ones, but I just chose Netlify. And then JotForms, one of the, as I stated with the static site websites, is you don't have any server-side rendering code, and majority of forms, especially all on WordPress, need PHP to submit those forms. So JotForms is just kind of, they have a free tier, which is pretty generous of them. Same with Netlify. JotForms is basically a way so that way I could handle form submission, and I'm not really doing anything with crazy with forms. I'll pull up the website, but I just have a simple contact form that's literally just name, email, message, send. So I'm using them as kind of for the forms. So that's kind of, where, why, and if anyone has any no questions there, then I can jump into the more technical stuff and actually pull up the code editor and dive in.
Cool. So I have like a naive question on this is, having not seen Gatsby before, my impression of it is you build a regular WordPress site and then you run this publish button, and then this publish generates a static site. Based on your current stack, it looks like that's not what's happening. It looks like it's a completely separate build. Is that correct?
That is correct. So actually with my WordPress site, and I will show you this now to kind of explain it. So I am using, let's see, sorry, I have a lot of screens open. So for my backend, I'm just using the local tool that WP Engine bought a little while ago. And this is actually my WordPress site now. my front end is just a white screen. I have nothing on it because everything lives. I forget what it is. GraphQL. So I have to put in a query, but long story short, all my data lives at this endpoint. So there's actually no reason for me to have a theme at all on my WordPress site. So yeah, basically Gatsby is where I'm developing the actual theme of the website, and WordPress is literally just hosting my data, and Gatsby is connected to that WordPress site and grabbing that data. And then I tell Gatsby basically how to display it. So yeah, this is actually my current WordPress site that it's building off of. And you can kind of see here, as I was saying, my plugins now, this is all I have back here. This is just different stuff. So WP Gatsby, one of the biggest complaints about Gatsby or not really Gatsby, just static site generators, probably about a year or so ago, is you have to build them all down to HTML files. And if you have a lot of pages, that can take a long while. And that was a huge complaint, which was super fair because, I mean, if you had thousands of pages, some of these sites could take, 20, 30 minutes to build, which is pretty absurd when you think about it. Now, and this is where kind of Gatsby, and why I say I think they're really hanging into it, is Gatsby Cloud actually has a preview function and incremental builds, meaning that once you connect Gatsby to your site, it will listen for when you create new content and only build that page or that post and then build it instead of recompiling your whole website. So that was kind of like one of the biggest complaints, but that has changed quite a bit, which is very exciting because I think that was a huge pitfall and a lot of people, I mean, that was honestly the biggest complaint, which was fair for enterprise level sites was, I don't want to spend 20 minutes compiling down static HTML files. So Gatsby has solved that problem, which is very nice. And Next.js, and there's quite a few of them all now kind of do that, what they call incremental builds instead of compiling the whole website. So yeah, this is just kind of the actual WordPress website. There's nothing in here. I have a bunch of posts. It's mostly just considered just stuff of me traveling around. It's more just kind of personal so that way I can keep track of what I'm doing. Nothing too crazy. So let's see. So one of the biggest hurdles of me jumping into Gatsby, and I'll kind of explain my frustrations or just learning curve, is I had to learn GraphQL. Gatsby runs on GraphQL, and what that is a database query language, which is completely, it was very intimidating at first, and I came to love it. If anyone has done a lot of data with consuming REST APIs, you will know that when you hit a REST API, you have to grab all that data, and then it's up to you to sort that. The big difference between GraphQL and your standard RESTful API is GraphQL, you can grab the specific data you want without having to query everything and then sort it. So if I only want certain properties on a post, I can just grab those properties instead of hitting the default WordPress endpoint of all the posts, and then it just displays everything, and I got to grab all that and change that up. So I'm not really going to dive into GraphQL or React or anything like that. But what I will say is they make it really easy. They provide IDEs, which is just your GUI on how to make different requests that you would like. So if I want to grab all of my posts and stuff like that with a certain category, I can. And they allow you to copy it and paste it into the front end of the theme to grab that data, which I'll pull up in a second. But yeah, so that's kind of the back end, what I needed to do this. If you want to use the Yoast info and just show into GraphQL, you'll need this plugin. This is just your standard ACF plugin. This connects to WP Gatsby. This makes it so that we can do incremental builds if you want to leverage that. WP GraphQL, another necessity one. This makes it so that way I have that endpoint, which you can see all the data here. You can change your endpoint. It has a couple settings here, and it makes it this. This is Gatsby choice of data. you can also use GraphQL with Next or 11D or a lot of those other static site generators. This is not a Gatsby plugin. This is a totally different technology that Gatsby uses this. So it's required to use for Gatsby, but it's not required to do headless stuff. You could just use the REST API. But if you take the time to learn GraphQL, it was amazing. And it was a lot easier than I thought it would be to kind of sit down and play with this. Especially if you're coming from, integrating RESTful APIs and data from third parties that don't use GraphQL. So yeah, that's kind of the back end of it. So that's all I'm doing here. And then I will show you. So this is now where my site is. And this is the Gatsby version. You can see it has a bunch of shiny random things, all this built into it. Super fast, super fun. And that was kind of another reason why I wanted to dive into it, was I wanted to kind of leverage. The cool thing about Gatsby and a lot of the stuff is you can use any React library within Gatsby since it's built on top of React. Gatsby is pretty much just a framework built on React that's very opinionated on how you route your files and display things and code patterns. So that's basically all it is there. So I'll go and dive into the code, and I'll show you kind of Gatsby specific stuff. Let's see, I wrote this all down so that way I try to keep it organized here. Let's see. Cool. So we'll go into Gatsby. So first, as I said, Gatsby has an official WordPress plugin, which makes it super nice. And all this stuff lives in NPM. Another big headache. The NPM and no package manager world and installing dependencies is a lot of fun. Every time you update stuff, I personally learned Gatsby has a big community behind it, but with anyone, you guys know specifically, just in general, folks know that tech is changing a lot and it's very fast changing in the NPM world. And every time I was updating stuff, like I would have to set aside time to kind of resolve dependency conflicts and stuff like that. That was honestly my biggest headache, was really getting into the NPM world. And, Gatsby's good. They have their own official plugins, which is this data source, this Gatsby source WordPress is one of them. I pretty much was only sticking with source community ones, or sorry, the official plugins, the community ones. For example, I tried using a WordPress one, or sorry, Instagram one that basically pulled my Instagram theme like I had on my old website, and it was just a headache. And I kept running into different issues. And long story short, I just removed it and wrote my own function, which I'll dive into it later. But that was, a big lesson learned, is I'm only using big packages that are supported by Gatsby or other big React packages. So yeah, so this is my Gatsby config. This is basically your configuration on everything with Gatsby. All the stuff you see in here are plugins that are officially created by them. This handles images, which was super nice. I'm using Tailwind, and PostCSS is a way to remove any extra classes, because Tailwind loads the whole library in, which is really big, like 4 megabytes. And then PostCSS goes through all my files, find the classes I'm using, extract those, and displays it. So that way my CSS files are teeny tiny. This is a PWA plugin. Gatsby has great support for progressive web apps, which is really nice. And that kind of comes out of the box. Sitemap plugin, pretty standard here stuff. This is a GraphQL query that I copied, pasted in here. This basically pulls in all my pages and posts and spits them into my sitemap. Let's see. Yeah, this is just other stuff. Google Tag Manager, how I put Tag Manager in. But the big thing I just really want to focus on here, without going through all the different plugins, is this right here is the WordPress specific one. Their documentations are amazing. They have full on tutorials, everything you need to get up and running, how to install the plugin, you know, how to display different things. There's a lot of starter themes, stuff like that. So, you know, kind of why I said why I chose Gatsby is when I saw how nice this documentation was after feeling slightly jaded from the Gutenberg and block editor stuff. This was a big relief, and I was like, oh man, I got to jump on this. Theme starters and examples. I can literally, you know, clone down these different projects and see how people are doing things and building things and how I can get up and running. So I was fairly impressed with how quick it was for me to pull in the WordPress stuff. And basically the only thing that's required is this URL. And this is the basically is that URL I was showing you, the local / GraphQL. This is what goes in here in the URL. And after that, you're pretty much connected. So that makes it super nice. The browser file is just a global file that you can add any global styles and JS here. So this is my CSS file. After it's compiled, it gets pulled in here. And then I'm using a library for all the animations called animate on scroll. And this just imports it to the header. So you can kind of think of this as stuff that will go into your head tag like JavaScript or CSS, and you can import it into here. Node file, I will come back to this, but basically if you want to create your own GraphQL data, this is how you would do it. And I will come back because like I said, I had to create my own Instagram one. And I had to create a function that hit my Instagram API and feed that into the GraphQL data so that way I could grab it. This kind of gets pretty complex. There's really not too much reason to be in here if you're kind of doing your standard WordPress stuff. This is only really needed if you need to create your own custom GraphQL data to feed into your Gatsby WordPress site. And 9 times out of 10, there's already a plugin that does that. I just got kind of frustrated with the Instagram one and decided to do it on my own, which was probably not necessary, but you know, here we are. I will see, where is my, let's go ahead and I'm going to start it really fast so that we can kind of see what the development looks like. Let me make sure that gets going. Cool. So kind of spits out a bunch of different things. This is basically, since I'm connected to my local, I am ignoring the self-signed certificate. So it's throwing errors basically saying, hey, this is unsafe. This is not trusted certificate. And I'm like, I don't care. So that's basically what this error is saying, is just like, ignore the self-signed certificate. And I know that it's unsafe, but we're going to use it anyways. Cool. So when it develops and it spits out, this is the GraphQL interface from Gatsby, and this pulls in all my WordPress stuff, and it's pretty cool because it prefixes it with WP. So all this stuff you see with WP came in from that plugin I have in my config, and this spits out everything. So for example, I can see my general settings, which is your WordPress general settings when you go to settings. And oh wait, I don't want to filter anything. So you can kind of see like what my site description is. It'll show you language, email, if you have that stuff kind of filled in. Anything you have in your general settings in there. I don't have anything because I hard coded it in my actual one. The SEO comes from the WP GraphQL connects to Yoast. So anything that you see under WP and SEO, this actually comes from the Yoast plugin, so you can control that. So just to kind of make it more simple, let's go into, let's pull in a post really fast. So display like a single post and kind of connect the dots here. Let's figure out how I have to do this again. I don't want to see the ID. So this will show all of my posts. We'll show the slug and we'll show the title. So when I hit this GraphQL endpoint, which is this right here, which you can copy and paste and put into your file, this pulls in all of my, this right here is just a list of all my posts, and it shows the slug and title. So with stuff like this is, you know, when I dig into the back end a bit more, you'll see a bunch of GraphQL queries. And this is basically how I was grabbing my posts and, you know, such as like my recent feed and stuff like that, archive pages. It spits back all of these and you can grab it and do what you would like with it. So let's go into some constants, some stuff that I kind of shortcut here because I didn't feel like it needed to be dynamic. One of those is my navigation. You can grab your navigation from WordPress. This site was so small that I'm not doing that. I have 4 links in my nav. And this right here is basically just a JavaScript file that I'm using to create these links. So that's basically everything you see here is how these are showing. So I did take the kind of shortcut there and created just a hard-coded nav in a sense. Also did the same thing. Instead of grabbing my social media stuff from WordPress, I just made a JSON file and threw it in there to grab it. The other thing is I have 2 different hooks, and this is called my use post, and this literally, so I'll kind of show you how this works. So this is my GraphQL, and if I can copy and paste this in here. I don't need this. This is that query I ran, and I'll kind of show you what this is saying. So this is grabbing all my WordPress posts. It's sorting them by the date in descending order. And I'm also formatting the string. And if you've used the JavaScript new date function, this is just, so basically it shows like this. So yeah, this is basically all the data that comes back from it. So like I said, I created a hook because since this is primarily a blog, there are quite a few different places that I'm showing my posts and sorting them through. Like I have a recent, on my homepage, I have like a recent post. Then I have the blog page with all these. So I created a hook, which is basically just a function that stores all these posts, and then I can call it in different components and sort through it. So that's one hook. I did the same with Instagram. Basically, as I said, I created my own endpoint here, which will show, what is it? So this is the one I created in my Gatsby node file, but this basically hits my Instagram API that I set up, and then just grabs my recent posts, and then this is me storing them in a function so that way I can use them where I want. So those are just kind of what we call hooks. It's just kind of a global variable that I can pull into different components at any time, which was super nice. So the way Gatsby works is the routing system, you can kind of see here, I have source and then pages. So this contact page is literally /contact. So for example, I have pages /contact, this is here. And if I were to, hopefully I don't break anything here, since I'm just developing stuff, we'll just say test.js. I don't think I even need anything, but we'll try it out. Yeah, it's all right, well, fine. Cool, so. Not using JSX, but whatever. Yes. All right, now I have a very simple component. Don't give me any errors. There we are. So that's kind of how the routing works, is anything that lives under pages, you create that URL, and it will basically by default feed off of this, whatever you name it, and that's how that shows. So that's a very simple thing, which is pretty cool. So that's basically what they call routing, and they have this pages directory, and you create those pages in there, and when you create the React component, it will spit it out up front. And if you're looking, you probably see this weird guy. It's like WP post.slug.js, and you're like, what is this? So one of the pain points is basically what this is saying is use the WP post slug and create any page that has a post slug. And it's a thing called dynamic routing, which is pretty dang cool. But it basically makes it so that way you could obviously, if I want to create a page for every post, I am not going to go in here and create, you know, blah, 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 dash, you know, slug, blah, 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 .js, post 1, post 2, blah, 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 .js, post 3. Like that's very time consuming and efficient. So Gatsby actually creates a way to dynamically create different pages. And I shouldn't say I created a way, but you can create it so that we can do slugs, have them for tags, category. So long story short, basically what this is a way to display anything that has a post slug, it will display. So for example, this page is created from this template. And what this does is it basically says, hey, when someone hits a WP goes to a post, it will pull the WP post.slug, and that .slug is a property. So that was GraphQL. Show it in here. So basically, this is the GraphQL query that makes this run. This is just me just naming it. This is me pulling the parameter that's passed, which I'm saying, hey, look for the slug, which is a string. I'm passing it in here. I'm grabbing, so this is saying, hey, grab the WordPress post that matches this slug here. That equals is, or EQs pretty much means equals. So that's basically what I'm doing here is, hey, when someone hits this, if there's no routing for it, check this, grab the slug, and then grab this, everything I'm grabbing here. You can see I'm grabbing the slug, title, tags, categories, content, date format, all this stuff. SEO, this comes from the WordPress GraphQL and SEO plugin. And that's like kind of what I'm using to create this and different, my meta tags and stuff in my head. So that's basically a way to automate creating every single blog post pretty quickly. You can create different layouts and stuff. Like if you want to create category-based layouts, which you can kind of see here, this is the same thing. If I go to /category / this, when it sees this route, it's the same exact kind of concept in the sense it's like, hey, when you see that path, grab that slug, the end of this, the last part, grab all the WordPress posts, filter it by each post that matches this slug that's in the URL. And then this is just grabbing the data that comes with it, which is pretty identical. And yeah, so that's kind of me displaying different categories, different posts. It makes it dynamic so that we don't have to type in each different URL here. These are different components. I'll dive into SEO in a second, but that was also sort of a learning curve there, was kind of creating that because it's very Yoast, Rank Math, all those plugins make it very easy to do SEO stuff. And with Gatsby, you kind of have to bring your own solution, which there are plenty of tutorials on how to do it, and even plugins, which is super nice. And I kind of wrote mine based off of another community plugin I found that was specifically for Yoast and WP GraphQL. And I just picked apart what I wanted and made my own. So yeah, this is the template for my posts. I won't dive too much into the different React code, but I just wanted to explain that how this is actually displaying and how it knows what to connect here. So yeah, it grabs the string and matches the post with that slug. You could do this by ID if you're passing an ID. You can pass any sort of parameters you want in here. And then you can tell GraphQL to listen for them and create templates based off of that. Let's see, where are we at? Settings, constant hooks, creating the blog, dynamic slug routing. Let's see, what else am I missing in here? We'll check out the SEO part. So like I said, creating the SEO part was kind of fun. This is my component, which you'll see, which I just exit out of it. I don't know why. That is everything this component right here that's being imported. This component lives. And basically what I am doing is, where is my Gatsby comes baked in with a site metadata that you can grab. And this is kind of my fallback for if any of the pages don't have titles, standard meta tag stuff, descriptions, whatever. This will fall back to this. So basically this is saying grab this data here, which is the metadata that I was just displaying here. So that's what's grabbing this. It's grabbing my general WordPress settings, if I'm using those, as kind of my fallback. And then as I go into here, I won't explain it too much, but basically React Helmet is a React component that basically comes built in with Gatsby, and it's a way to modify your head tag. So you can kind of see I'm passing in the language attribute, the title, the meta stuff. Some of the stuff's not dynamic, like my robots, and but my description, keywords, title, my open graph stuff for social media posting, all this is dynamic. And the way this works is I pull it into here, I pass the whole post object, which is all this data here, and you can see that I have an SEO part. So when I pass this post object in and my SEO component, it's saying, hey, look for this property. And if it has it, which is the post SEO, if it has the post SEO, display that. If not, go back to a fallback, which is my site metadata. This was a fun pain point. This one probably took me relatively the longest to do because there's a lot of fallbacks. I wanted to include the schema markup, which is this. And the cool part is I'm pulling this directly from Yoast. Yoast made this really nice to do that. Let's see. I should exit out of this. All right, so I'm just going to mimic this really fast, like I am. What am I doing wrong? There we go. So basically when I hit this page right here, this is all the data that's being displayed. And as I was just kind of saying, the Yoast plugin automatically generates the schema, which is really nice. So that's what this line of code is doing is, hey, if it has schema, grab it. Checking for it here. And if it has it, then, hey, display that within the thing. So that way it can dump that out. So that was the reason why I switched to the Yoast plugin back from Rank Math. Is the WP GraphQL and the support for that's really nice. And it made it very simple to dump in schema markup. Let's see. So that's the dynamic routing. All these different components are just kind of me breaking out certain things. Before I kind of dive into the Instagram part of it, did anyone have any questions or want to talk about, or me go back and explain anything? I know this is a lot about the setup, or just anything that I've covered in the last 45 minutes or so. Okay. Cool. But then what I will do is we'll check out where we at? So the other biggest pain point I had with this is pulling in. Gatsby makes it really nice to pull in a bunch of different data. They have a bunch of different plugins. Like you can search file system if you want to create markdown pages and stuff like that. This makes it really nice. They have a lot of search source. You can connect Shopify pretty easily. You can connect Drupal, MongoDB if you want to connect to different databases, all kinds of stuff. So it makes it really nice to connect to multiple things. So if I want to connect to Contentful, which I've done quite a bit of work here with the Contentful stuff, and WordPress, you can connect to both of these. So it's not like you have to have one source. You can connect to different sources and just pull the data you want. It makes it really nice to kind of tie that all together. But yeah, so I first came here and I was like, oh yeah, let's see what with Instagram. And I was like, they had a plugin. It is not the official one, but it was community built. I tried it out. I got frustrated, gave up, and came back and built my own. So another term you might hear is called serverless functions. And basically what that means, and this is what Gatsby does, is it grabs all your data and prints it into this cache folder. And this is a bunch of mess that I don't really understand, to be perfectly honest, but long story short, it grabs all your data and puts it into JSON files that lives in this cache folder. And that's one of the parts why it makes it so quick. So what they call a serverless function is basically at build time, I hit the API, grab all the data, save it in a JSON file. And that's what I had to do with Instagram, which was, not a lot of fun. And that's basically what this is. I have, let's see, where's my Instagram's owned by Facebook, and I don't know if anyone's done any work with Facebook's API and or Instagrams for that matter. It is a lot of work and confusion and was not fun to go through. It took me forever to figure out what the endpoint was that I needed just to find this. But I finally found it and I created my own. And this is basically me grabbing that endpoint, I'm grabbing that data, and I'm feeding it through one of Gatsby things, which is create node. And that's what they call these. These are nodes. So I'm just creating my own node, which is my all website name Insta node. So that's the creation of this here. And this is like how I picked that name for it. This is where it shows up here. So I created my own here, and it was really nice to save me a lot of time and headache. I should have just started here writing it out on my own. But that's basically what serverless function is at build time. It grabs this URL, puts the data in a JSON, and then it spits it into this GraphQL later, and then I can do whatever I would like with it, which is pretty cool. So it gives you an option. You could do that, if you had other APIs that don't, like if Gatsby doesn't have any source plugins and you need to pull in data from a third-party API and you want to save it in the GraphQL layer, this would be the way to do it. And they have really good documentation on how to set this up. I was pretty intimidated to do this at first because I had no idea what I was doing. And I found really good articles and documentation and reading through source plugins, and got this created pretty quickly, which was pretty nice. So that was like the most complicated technical thing that I had to do, was creating that Instagram stuff. The other part, which really I enjoyed Gatsby's opinion and how they built this in, is they have their own way of handling images. So in my Gatsby config, they have their own plugin to handle images, and they use a library called Sharp, which is a way to modify images on the fly and change formats and do all kinds of different stuff. They have, again, like I said, I can't rant and rave about the documentation enough. They have a really good setting it up, installing the images. But anyways, what I really liked about the images, let me pull up where my, they have their own component with the images, and you can grab, when you use their plugin, it creates this child image Sharp, which I said is like a plugin to modify stuff. And you basically feed this endpoint into it, and it spits you out all kinds of different options. But the really cool part about this is, one, it automatically optimizes it and compresses them, and you can set different image sizes and stuff. They have different filters, like if you want to add different effects on them, you can. There's all kinds of really cool stuff, but the main thing, which I thought was really cool, is it automatically spits them out in WebP as well. So all the media stuff that I would have had to integrate manually into my old WordPress theme, I didn't have to do that here, and I thought Gatsby handled it really nice. The only thing that was really annoying that I didn't like is they put their own wrapper around it, so it made it really hard to do any sort of like image hover effects. For example, on my old website, on the featured stuff, if you hovered over the featured blog post, it would kind of scale it to make it larger. This was such a pain in the butt to do that I gave up. But you can see that it spits it out. This is, the default component. It spits it out in the source set, so that way, as I'm, depending what my view size is, that changes. And you can kind of see that spitting out different things. You can see that it's in WebP, which is super nice. So it's super quick, super fast. And yeah, the image optimization and the image handling stuff was really nice. And that was, yeah, I really enjoyed that and diving into that. So that's something they're very opinionated on with images, and it made a lot of sense. At first, I was like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do this, but then they handled all the hard stuff for me pretty instantly. So that was nice. The other thing is too, is I like that it handles a lot of pre-rendering and stuff. So for example, what that means is, if I go into my featured posts component, they have their own link router built into it too. And what that means is when I'm coding anything that's internally in my site, you can kind of see here, it has the slug I'm putting in here. Gatsby does prefetch, meaning how I said it spits all your data into a JSON file and makes it super quick that way. When it hovers over a link, I don't know if you can see it in the network tab. Let's try it out. This might work. You can kind of see here that page.data.json. So it's already loading the data, any internal links and stuff like that, that I tell it to using that link tag. It will automatically do that and hover that. So that when you click on it, it already has that data and it's just spitting it out in that file, which is super nice. So they're pretty opinionated on their own links. But I like it. Like I said, as I'm hovering over this, you can see my network tab. It's grabbing the data. It makes it super quick. And when you click that link, it's loaded. So that was pretty cool. That was another thing that they were pretty opinionated on. So that's their images. That was their links. So we covered GraphQL. I think as far as Gatsby goes, that's pretty much a pretty good general overview. Everything else is, really diving into kind of how I coded things and stuff like that. But that's kind of the overall how Gatsby works. That's the main components that you would really be using: GraphQL, their link, and their whatchamacallit, their image handling. Cover the Gatsby source plugin. See.
Hey, Branden, there was one part, and I might have missed it.
Yeah.
Is there where does the templating start? Like, where's your doc type?
No, that's a very good question, actually. Let's see. All right. So we have my source, and let's see, where did I spit this out at? So my index.js is kind of the main one. I have a layout component. So this is everything that is global in a sense, lays here. So this is kind of my global wrapper around everything. This is me feeding in the header, which is up here. This is that component. This is what it's kind of like a slot or children. So I put everything in a main tag, and then everything, this is the main section here, and then this is the footer. So this is like how you create different layouts. And if you noticed when I was in let's just go here, you'll see that I'm importing that component, and this wraps everything.
Okay.
So that's the general site component. Now, your question was more related on kind of like where Gatsby feeds that into, which I'm trying to.
Is there like a header? I saw you're importing header and footer. Is it like header.js that stuff starts at? And I might,
so those are,
and I don't know much about React, so I'm like, oh, does React even need a doc type? Like, does it do all that stuff for you?
well, so you can set that. And that's kind of, so that React helmet where I was in SEO, and you can import that React helmet anywhere. That is a way to mess with the head tag. But they do have, I'm trying to remember.
Or do they just kind of like abstract that away for you? So it's like, you don't even need to worry about it.
They kind of do in that sense, but they do have, I'm trying to remember. See, that's what it spits out. I don't remember. They do kind of have like a, maybe I'm just getting confused with the different JS frameworks. They all handle things differently. The React helmet tag is the way that you hook into the actual, head meta stuff. I might have to on that. I'm trying to remember. So I mean, this is your the Gatsby browser file, which is kind of like anything that was global, how I was importing. So this is like how I'm importing my CSS file globally, and this library globally.
And then it figures out the,
there's kind of
the link tag and
a
all
lot
that
of
stuff.
magic. Yeah,
Sure.
There's a lot of magic in the background that I'm not 100% on.
Sure. Yep. Like anything else, right? They abstract stuff away, and it's like, okay, I don't have to worry about this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I get confused jumping through frameworks. Like, for example, Svelte has an index.html, and then it has like basically you put the ID where you want it to hydrate and fill in the app. So that's like how Svelte works. It has like an index.html, and then I have like div ID equals Svelte app or whatever, and then it hydrates into that. I don't know how, like, exactly where Gatsby's magic is, where it hooks into that and displays that.
Cool. But like kind of the answer is it's magic and you don't have to worry about it. Cool.
I mean, it's magic in the sense of like, I don't know exactly how they hook into it or where that feeds into, but anything that you need to modify or feed into kind of like that doc type and stuff, you can set that up.
Got it. So like if the client was like, hey, put your Facebook pixel, you need to add this random tracking script at the end of the head. Like there's a pretty easy mechanism to do that. I would imagine,
Yeah.
well, like when I said Facebook pixel, I'm like, well, that's probably I'm sure there's probably a React component for that, right? Or something.
Yeah.
Like something that's
So
out there already for that.
Oh, totally. There is. So I am cheating using a Google Tag Manager plugin.
Sure.
And for my needs, I've pretty much, especially with tracking stuff, I've always set it up in Google Tag Manager and put it through there. Like any script, third-party script, I've usually put in Google Tag Manager.
Okay.
Because it's Google Tag Manager is pretty cool because it allows you to put in different scripts and then have different events on how they fire. Like if you want to fire in certain pages and stuff like that, it handles all of that for you.
Oh, nice.
And just loads in one script. So that was something that I learned from like an SEO firm is they handle all their scripts in Google Tag Manager and put everything in there like Facebook pixels or any sort of tracking stuff. And like Google Analytics is handled through there. So that's
I
kind of where I'm at.
I didn't realize it did that either, actually. And now that you say that, it's like, well, I guess that's why they call it Google Tag Manager, because it manages all the tags. It's like, oh, duh.
Yeah,
I did not know that. I was just thought
it
it was their fancy name for their new Google Analytics way of inserting.
No, actually, that came out like a week ago, or not a week ago, not too long ago. It's like Google V4, and I actually discovered that while I was resetting up this project. And I was like, "What is this?" They're like, "We have new analytics and blah 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 blah." That's a whole nother topic, but
sure.
Yeah. So what I've always done, my kind of practices is any sort of third party, especially tracking stuff, I put in Google Tag Manager and let that handle it, and then just feed Tag Manager in. And I'm doing it this way on this project.
That seems like a really good way. That seems like a really good way to do it too, because then your SEO person doesn't have to bug you to add random tags. They can just add it in Google Tag Manager.
Yeah, and it makes it really clean because like if you're changing a theme and stuff like that, like it's very easy just copy and paste that code versus going back and trying to collect all the different codes or however you're doing it. So I really haven't had much of a reason to put any like other scripts inside of the website outside of Tag Manager. But I would be kind of curious about the best practices within Gatsby on how they would do that. I just haven't came across it. Yeah, now you kind of have me curious of like where that kind of like hooks and hydrates into. Because I mean, they tell you how to change all the different stuff, but does it? I would have to kind of look through their node packages, but
sure. Yeah, no worries. And then kind of like my trepidation into like moving into this was like, I think about this and I'm like, okay, you can template in PHP or you can template in Gatsby/React. And it's like, if you do it in PHP, it's enqueue it, like you add a plugin in and it enqueues the script, it enqueues the style. Versus if you move over to this, you lose most of that. But then you have to kind of step back and make a philosophical question like, well, how much of that stuff am I actually using? Or like, yeah, I want to add the Smash Balloon Instagram plugin, but there's probably and that might be a bad example because it sounded like the React component it didn't work very well for that one, but it's like, oh, well, we'll just use a React component instead. So it seems like there's like a bit of wheels to be reinvented sometimes. Like it sounded like the SEO stuff was a little weird and it sounded like there were some pain points, but like, I guess my question is like, as you stand back from it is like those, because it seems like there's also like a lot of simplicity in this and a lot of weird stuff going on in a normal PHP theme. So like, is that trade-off worth, do you see that as a trade-off? And then does that feel like, did that trade-off seem worth it to you?
Yeah, so that was kind of like my final thoughts. I think it depends where your end goal is with the website. I think personally for me, especially like I was doing a lot of work with SEO firms and stuff like that, and kind of with the core web vitals. I think the trade-off is worth it. You do lose, like kind of one of my biggest pitfalls was you do lose that WordPress plugin ecosystem. But I will say that just in general, like the React community is probably just big. So there is kind of a learning curve, and I was kind of beating my head on a couple things, like I said, like the SEO and Instagram stuff. And to be perfectly honest, there were plugins, and I probably was being overcomplicated, more difficult, because I was like, oh, I'm already learning this, might as well just figure out how to write my own function. So half of that was kind of my own woes. Like I said, there was a SEO plugin that I kind of could have used, but I kind of took what they had and modified it to what I wanted. So there is, especially the bigger stuff like SEO and Instagram and a lot of that, the bigger normal kind of, popular items, there's most likely already React or Gatsby plugin or ecosystem for it. But you do lose the WP plugin system, which for better or for worse is there. And there's a lot of stuff that's really simple with WordPress that you do lose kind of jumping into Gatsby. But I would say that's kind of the point, is this is definitely more of a technical thing, but I think the end results, like if I go down now to
like all that like prefetching and stuff, like performance wise.
Yeah, like they just use a lot of modern stuff that, like, anyone who's been in Google Page Insights and puts their URL in there, and start seeing all the different stuff that get dinged on. Like Gatsby kind of already built that in. Like it automatically inlines your critical CSS. It handles the images, which I was kind of explaining, the optimizing, breaking them into WebP, automatically creating the source sets, which to be fair, WordPress does too, and it's catching up a lot on that. But it just handled a lot of that stuff that I found getting dinged for. And I think with like page speed, what is that? Like keeping it under 3 seconds is always kind of like my benchmark. And I'm not saying I haven't done that with WordPress stuff, and I haven't spent any time really digging through and seeing what's dinging for me on this. But just
you could do a lot of work. Like we did a lot of work on our hoverboard site to get it to get a really good score in here, but it took a lot of work. Versus it seems like you get a little bit more performance for free going this route.
I've done zero digging or optimization in on this since I've launched this project. So my mobile score, I could go back and fix it up a little bit in the 80s. My desktop, I'm at 98. But yeah, just the built-in stuff that this came with, and I feel like the Gatsby in general is really pushing to dominate that market. So I feel like this is only going to get better and have to make you think less the more and more this keeps evolving. For this kind of different stuff, like this is basically, if you go to their website, they really preach about speed, and that's, their main focus is modern development with speed. And as far as, I've used quite a few different frameworks, whether Laravel, backend, full MVC frameworks to, Gatsby, Next, Svelte, and stuff like that. And the front end frameworks are really pushing that speed stuff. And I've even noticed, like, I kind of like been checking my analytics just to see if stuff has jumped up at all. And it's pretty common whenever you relaunch and design a website, like your organic traffic jumps quite a bit. I don't want to say anything too soon because it's only been like 3 weeks since I've really put this out, but I have kind of seen that jump in organic traffic by a bit. I don't know if that's between page speed or that I'm spinning in the schema stuff. Like there's a couple other extra SEO stuff I threw in there to kind of, make it more modern. So it's hard to pinpoint what it was, but without really having to thinking or spend a lot of time on any optimization stuff and seeing, scores above 80, 90 is really nice. And that was kind of my biggest motivation factor. And just, I feel like in general, WordPress is kind of split 2 ways, one this way, and then one kind of that full site block editor stuff. And I think both serve a really good purpose. But I was curious and really dug into this. And overall, I think once you get pretty comfortable with React, that learning curve is hard. But my counterpoint to that is, like, if you're going to be building the block editor, I guess you do have advanced custom fields filling that in, but they're built on React too. So it's like you got to kind of bite that bullet and learn React no matter which route you go. And for me, it's like, if I'm really going to dive into that more, then I kind of want to go with a community and where like a lot of people are really pushing this stuff and the modern JS stuff. And that's why I chose React. Cool. Let's see.
Right, I'm gonna go ahead and pause or stop the recording so that we can dig into questions.
Totally.